The coffee heir and the hotel princess. Jack and Emily were from different worlds, but fate brought them together. However, what seemed like a fairy tale concealed a dark plan. Manipulated and deceived, Jack not only discovered the truth, he turned the tables. And now, who really wins? The morning began like so many others at the corner coffee shop on Main Street in New York City. Jack wiped the counter with automatic movements while observing the routine of hurried customers who came and went, all immersed in their own lives. At 28, he had already grown accustomed to this simple but gratifying routine. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the aroma of bread just out of the oven. That's when she walked in. The little bell above the door chimed softly, announcing her arrival, but it was the delicate scent of jasmine that first caught Jack's attention. Emily Harrison, heiress to the Harrison empire of luxury hotels, glided through the small establishment. As if floating, her Christian Louboutin heels barely touching the wooden floor. Her perfectly styled brown hair framed a face that often graced the covers of society magazines. Jack swallowed hard, trying to maintain the professional composure he always valued. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" His hands, calloused from years of work, discreetly gripped the cleaning cloth. Emily raised her eyes from her latest model smartphone and for the first time really looked at him. Her green eyes, enhanced by flawless makeup, met his with unexpected intensity. "A sugar-free cappuccino, please," and she hesitated for a moment, her coral lips curving into a small smile. "Which pastry would you recommend?" The question caught Jack off guard. Customers like her usually placed their orders without making eye contact, let alone asking for recommendations. "Our mixed berry tart is the house specialty. I make them fresh every morning." "You're the baker?" Emily asked, her interest seeming genuine. "Actually, I'm the owner," Jack replied, with a mix of pride and shyness. "I inherited the coffee shop from my father 5 years ago and have been trying to maintain the tradition while also adding my own touch." Emily approached the counter, her delicate fingers lightly touching the glass that protected the desserts. Impressive. These days it's rare to find family businesses that maintain such authenticity. Her gaze swept over the cozy environment, lingering on the vintage details Jack had preserved from his father's time. "A slice of the tart, then?" Jack asked, trying to maintain his professionalism, even as he felt his heart racing under her attentive gaze. "Please," she replied, pulling a platinum card from her Hermes bag. "You know, it's refreshing to find a place like this amid so many standardized coffee chains." As Jack prepared the order, he could feel Emily's eyes following his movements. There was something different about her presence, something that went beyond the glamour and social status she carried. It was as if she was truly interested in this small universe he had built. The cappuccino was served in an antique porcelain cup, accompanied by the tart on a plate decorated with a delicate floral pattern. Emily chose a table near the window, where the morning light created a play of shadows through the frosted glass. Jack tried to focus on other customers, but his eyes invariably returned to her. Emily savored each bite of the tart with an expression of genuine pleasure, occasionally making notes on her phone. After a few minutes, she beckoned him with a gesture. "It was divine," she commented, her eyes sparkling. "Do you have a business card? I'd like to recommend this place to some friends." Jack handed her a simple but elegant card with the name Vintage Cafe in gold letters. His fingers brushed lightly against hers during the exchange, sending an electric current down his spine. "Jack Oliver," she read aloud, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "Thank you for the unique experience, Mr. Oliver. I'm sure we'll see each other again soon." And with that she left, leaving behind only the scent of jasmine and a generous tip. Jack remained there, watching her elegant silhouette disappear among the pedestrians on the busy street. Something told him that this casual encounter would change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The day continued its normal course, but Emily's presence had left an indelible mark on that space. Jack found himself replaying every detail of the interaction, every word exchanged, every look. There was something in the way she observed him that intrigued him deeply. At night, as he was closing the cafe, Jack found a golden card under the plate where Emily had left the tip. It was an invitation to a charity event at the Harrison Hotel, the most luxurious in her family's chain. On the back, handwritten in elegant calligraphy, was a message. Your presence would be a pleasant surprise, Emily. Jack held the invitation between his fingers, feeling the high-quality textured paper. It was as if he had found a golden ticket from Willy Wonka, a passport to a world completely different from his own. Should he accept? What interest could a woman like Emily Harrison have in a simple coffee shop owner? As he tucked the invitation into his wallet, Jack couldn't imagine that this simple piece of paper was just the first chapter of a story that would transform not only his life but also reveal long-held secrets of the Harrison family. Fate had chosen that ordinary morning to weave the first threads of a plot, much larger than he could suspect. Night fell over New York City, and the city lights began to shine like urban stars. In the now silent cafe, the scent of jasmine still lingered in the air like a persistent reminder that some encounters are more than mere coincidences. Jack locked the door, carrying with him not just the keys to the establishment, but also the weight of a decision that would change the course of his life forever. The Harrison Hotel stood imposingly in the heart of Manhattan, its mirrored windows reflecting the golden lights of the New York evening. Jack adjusted his rented tuxedo's tie for the 10th time as he crossed the marble lobby. Each step on the polished floor echoed as a reminder that he was far from his cozy coffee shop. The Defice ballroom was decorated with a luxury Jack had only seen in movies. Arrangements of white orchids rose from crystal vases, their delicate petals contrasting with the soft glow of the chandeliers. The music of a chamber orchestra floated in the air, mingling with the buzz of conversations from New York's high society. "Jack!" Emily's voice cut through the ambience like silk over velvet. She emerged from among the guests wearing an emerald green dress that seemed to have been made to highlight her eyes. "You came. The invitation was very kind," he replied, trying to hide his discomfort amidst so much luxury. "Your hotel is impressive." Emily smiled, a gesture that lit up her face in a way Jack had not yet witnessed. "Come, I want you to meet some people." She intertwined her arm with his with surprising naturalness, guiding him through the ballroom. The introductions followed in a whirlwind of names and titles. Businessmen, politicians, celebrities, all seemed to gravitate around Emily like planets around the sun. She, in turn, kept Jack constantly close, her hands occasionally touching his arm as she laughed at some joke or comment. "And this is my father, Alexander Harrison," Emily finally announced, stopping in front of a tall, imposing man. His graying hair and upright posture emanated a natural authority that made Jack instinctively straighten his spine. "So this is the famous Jack," Alexander commented, his calculating eyes studying every detail of the young man before him. "Emily, I mentioned your coffee shop. It seems you made a strong impression on my daughter." "Dad," Emily intervened with a playful tone, but Jack noticed an underlying tension in her voice. "Don't scare my guest." "Imagine," Alexander replied with a smile. That didn't reach his eyes. "Just trying to get to know better the man who captured my princess's attention." The conversation was interrupted by a group of executives who requested Alexander's presence. Before walking away, he cast one last penetrating look at Jack as if trying to unravel a particularly intriguing enigma. "Don't mind my father," Emily whispered, leading Jack to the ballroom's balcony. "He can be a bit intense sometimes." The New York night stretched out before them, a carpet of twinkling lights under a starless sky. The cooler air on the balcony brought some relief to Jack, who only then realized how tense he had been. "Why?" "Me?" The question escaped his lips before he could contain it. "Of all the people you know, why invite a simple coffee shop owner to an event like this?" Emily turned to him, her green eyes reflecting the city lights. "Maybe I'm tired of people who only approach me for the Harrison name. You're different, Jack. Genuine. When I walked into your cafe, I saw someone who built something with their own hands, who takes pride in what they do. That's rare in my world." Her words sounded sincere, but there was something more in her gaze, a depth that Jack couldn't fully decipher. Before he could explore that thought further, Emily moved closer, eliminating the distance between them. The kiss caught Jack by surprise. It was soft, delicate, tasting of champagne and unspoken promises. When their lips parted, he saw a different gleam in her eyes, something between triumph and vulnerability. "Sorry if I was hasty," she murmured, her fingers playing with the lapel of his tuxedo. "But since I walked into your cafe, I can't stop thinking about you." Jack felt his heart race. Everything seemed too surreal: the luxurious hotel, the elegant party, Emily Harrison in his arms. Part of him screamed that there was something wrong with this story, that it was too good to be true. But another part, perhaps the stronger one, was already completely captivated by the charm of this enigmatic woman. "You don't need to apologize," he replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I can't stop thinking about you either." Emily smiled, but for a brief moment Jack swore he saw a shadow pass through her eyes. Before he could reflect on it, she pulled him back into the ballroom, where the party continued in full swing. The rest of the night passed like a feverish dream. Jack danced with Emily, talked to people whose names constantly appeared in financial newspapers, and drank champagne that cost more than his monthly income. Several times he noticed Alexander Harrison watching them from afar, his face an unreadable mask of social courtesy. When the party began to wind down, Emily accompanied him to the hotel exit. "Tomorrow I have an important meeting in Washington," she said, adjusting his tie with an intimate gesture. "But I'd like to have dinner with you when I return. How about Friday?" Jack nodded, still dazed by the events of the night. Emily said goodbye with another kiss, this time more restrained, but no less intense. As he walked to hail a taxi, Jack had the distinct feeling that he had just embarked on a journey of no return. Back in his modest apartment, lying on the bed still wearing the rented tuxedo, Jack replayed every moment of the night. Emily's kiss still burned on his lips, but her last words before leaving echoed in his mind with a different tone. There was something in the way she spoke about the meeting in Washington, a studiedness that was too casual. In the silence of the early morning, as sleep finally reached him, Jack couldn't imagine that every detail of that night, Alexander's vigilant gaze, Emily's carefully chosen words, even the perfect timing of her kiss on the balcony, had been meticulously planned. The stage was being set for a much larger spectacle, and he, unknowingly, had just accepted the leading role. The weeks following the party at the Harrison Hotel transformed Jack's life into an emotional roller coaster. Emily had become a constant presence at the cafe, always arriving at different times, always with a captivating smile and sweet words. The romance blossomed at a speed that sometimes left Jack breathless. On a particularly busy afternoon, while Jack was organizing the next day's deliveries, Emily appeared without warning, as she usually did. This time, however, something in her expression seemed different. "We need to talk," she said, her voice more serious than usual. "Can you take a break?" Jack asked his trusted employee, Mrs. Johnson, to take over the counter for a few minutes. They went to the small room at the back of the cafe, where he kept his improvised office. Emily sat in the only available armchair, while he remained standing, leaning against the old wooden desk. "Did something happen?" he asked, noticing how she nervously twisted the family ring she always wore. "My father wants to get to know you better," she began, choosing her words carefully. "He's invited us for a weekend at the family's country house in the Hamptons." Jack felt a chill in his stomach. Since the party at the hotel, he had only met Alexander Harrison twice, on brief and formal occasions. The family patriarch always maintained a distant courtesy that made him uncomfortable. "And there's more," Emily continued, her green eyes fixed on his. "He wants to discuss a business proposal with you." "Business?" Jack furrowed his brow. "What kind of proposal?" "Dad was impressed with your cafe. He thinks we could expand the concept, create a chain of vintage cafes within the Harrison hotels." Emily stood up, approaching him with that feline manner that always hypnotized him. "It would be a perfect partnership, don't you think?" Jack felt his heart race, but not just because of Emily's proximity. The idea was tempting, expanding his small business, becoming part of the Harrison empire. Still, something didn't seem right. "Your father barely knows me," he argued. "Why would he make such a proposal?" Emily slid her fingers across his face, a gesture that always calmed him. Because he trusts my judgment, and because... She hesitated for a moment, lightly biting her lower lip. Because I told him we're thinking about getting married. The statement hit Jack like lightning. Married, but we never talked about it directly, she quickly completed. But don't you feel it? This connection between us? I've never met anyone like you, Jack, someone so genuine, so pure. Before he could fully process what was happening, Emily kissed him. It was a different kiss from the others, more intense, more urgent. When they separated, she had tears in her eyes. I know it seems hasty, she whispered, but sometimes, when you know, you just know. I don't want to waste time with social conventions when I'm sure of what I feel. Jack felt his head spin. Everything was happening too fast. The bell at the cafe door rang, momentarily bringing him back to reality. I need to get back to work, he mumbled, still dazed. Of course, Emily smiled, quickly composing herself. Think about the weekend in the Hamptons, okay? It would be a perfect opportunity to get to know the family better and discuss the future. Our future. After she left, Jack remained in his office for a few minutes, trying to organize his thoughts. Emily's words echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of the past few months. He had experienced a life he never imagined possible. Exclusive restaurants, elegant parties, a world of privileges and connections he had only seen from afar before. Night after closing the cafe, Jack found an envelope on his desk. Inside was a golden key with the Harrison Hotel logo and a handwritten card. For when you want to visit me, Presidential Suite, 20th floor. Your love, E. Tucking the envelope into his pocket, Jack began his usual walk home. The cool night air helped clear his thoughts. On the way, he stopped in front of a newsstand where a society magazine displayed a photo of Emily on the cover wearing a stunning dress at some charity event. That's when he noticed something strange. In the photo, Emily was wearing the same family ring he always saw her fidgeting with when nervous. But there was something different. The central stone, a ruby she said was her grandmother's heirloom, seemed to have a slightly different color from the one he knew. Must be the lighting in the photo, he muttered to himself, pushing away the uncomfortable feeling that was beginning to form in his chest. Arriving home, he found a message from Emily on his cell phone. I miss you already. Can't wait for our family weekend. Family. The word had a strange weight now. Jack threw himself onto his simple bed, looking at the peeling ceiling of his apartment. In a few months, his life had transformed into something he barely recognized. Was it everything he had always dreamed of, or was he being dragged into something he didn't fully understand? In the silence of the room, he remembered something his father used to say. When something seems too good to be true, it usually is, because it's not true. But then he remembered Emily's smile, the warmth of her kisses, the way she made him feel special. Sleep was slow to come that night. In his restless dreams, Jack saw himself on a huge chessboard where all the pieces had Emily's face, and each move seemed to take him deeper into a game whose rules he didn't know. Somewhere in the distance, Alexander Harrison watched it all with an enigmatic smile, moving invisible pieces with skilled hands. The Harrison mansion in the Hamptons emerged from the mist like a fairy tale castle. Jack observed the imposing, a structure through the window of Emily's Porsche as they climbed the private road that wound through the property. The impeccable garden, with its elaborate topiaries and marble fountains, seemed to have come straight out of a period film. Welcome to our retreat, Emily smiled, parking the car in the circular driveway of the mansion. Dad should already be waiting for us. As if summoned by his daughter's words, Alexander Harrison appeared at the main door, wearing a cashmere sweater and linen pants. Finally, you've arrived. The weather is perfect for a good wine on the veranda. Jack noticed something different. In the behavior of the Harrison patriarch, his usual reserve had been replaced by an almost exaggerated cordiality. Alexander made a point of personally showing Jack the room where he would be staying, a luxurious suite overlooking the valley. I hope you feel at home, Alexander commented, his hand resting on Jack's shoulder with a weight that seemed to mean more than a simple gesture of hospitality. Emily chose this room especially for you. After settling in, Jack went down to join Emily and her father on the main veranda. The view was breathtaking, mountains covered by a soft mist, the afternoon sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A bottle of wine was already open on the center table. Bordeaux 1982, Alexander commented, serving Jack a glass. An exceptional year, just like this moment. Emily snuggled up next to Jack on the leather sofa, her presence a familiar mix of comfort and unease. There was something in her behavior, a subtle tension that he couldn't fully define. Jack, Alexander began, his tone assuming a professional seriousness. Emily must have mentioned that I have a proposal for you. Actually, it's more than a proposal. It's an opportunity to become part of the Harrison family in an integral way. Jack felt Emily's gaze upon him, expectant. Alexander continued, "Our hotels need a renovation, something that brings authenticity amidst so much standardized luxury. Your cafe has exactly what we're looking for. Soul, tradition, personal history. We want to expand this concept to our network. And with the marriage," Emily quickly added, "it would be a natural transition. You would become part of the board of directors, have a share in the profits." Marriage? Alexander raised his eyebrows as if the news surprised him. But there was something rehearsed in his reaction, like an actor executing a memorized cue. "Have you already decided?" Emily intertwined her fingers with Jack's. "We're still talking about it, Dad, but when you know it's right." "Absolutely." Alexander agreed, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "When it's right, it's right." The conversation continued during dinner, served in the main dining room under a crystal chandelier that must have been worth more than Jack's cafe. With each moment, more details of the expansion plan were revealed. Numbers, projections, market strategies. Jack felt dizzy, and it wasn't just from the wine. Later, when everyone had retired, Jack remained awake in his room, going over the day's events. Something bothered him, a persistent feeling that there were pieces missing in this too-perfect puzzle. Restless, he decided to take a walk around the mansion. The corridors were silent, illuminated only by the soft light of antique wall sconces. Passing by the library, he heard muffled voices. He immediately recognized Emily's and her father's tones. "Have to be more subtle, darling," Alexander's voice sounded irritated. "He needs to believe it was his idea." "I'm doing the best I can," Emily replied, her voice completely different from the one Jack knew, harder, colder. "But we don't have much time. The clause—" Jack quickly moved away as he heard footsteps approaching the door. His heart was racing as he returned to his room. What clause could that be? Why did they need him to believe that something had been his idea? The next morning, during breakfast on the veranda, Emily was as radiant as ever, serving him coffee in French porcelain cups. But now Jack noticed small inconsistencies in her behavior. The way her smiles sometimes didn't reach her eyes, how her hands occasionally trembled when serving a drink. "Darling, I was thinking," she began, her voice melodious as honey. "What if we moved up the wedding? We don't need anything too elaborate, just something intimate, with the closest family." Jack observed his reflection in the coffee cup. The man staring back at him seemed different, older, more cautious. "Don't you think everything is happening too fast?" "Love isn't hasty, it has timing," she promptly replied as if the phrase had been rehearsed. "And our timing is perfect." Alexander, who was reading the newspaper near them, lowered the pages for a moment. "Emily has always known what she wants, since she was little. When she sets her mind to something—" He left the sentence hanging, his gaze meeting Jack's with a disturbing intensity. At that moment, Emily's cell phone rang. She moved away to answer, speaking in a low voice. Jack noticed that she automatically started twisting the ring on her finger, that same ring that had caught his attention in the magazine photo. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Alexander asked when she returned. "Just work, Dad. That situation in Washington." She stopped abruptly, casting a quick glance at Jack. "Nothing important." But Jack had caught something in her expression, a flash of real concern, the first genuine emotion he had seen in her in days. What could be happening in Washington, and why did she seem so anxious to hide it from him? The rest of the weekend passed at an apparently relaxed pace, but Jack felt the tension growing beneath the polished surface of rehearsed smiles and gestures. Each conversation seemed to have a subtext that he couldn't fully decipher. Each look exchanged between father and daughter carried silent messages. On the trip back to New York, while Emily drove concentrating on the winding road, Jack pretended to sleep. Through half-closed eyes, he observed how she occasionally checked messages on a second cell phone, one he had never seen before, hidden in the glove compartment. Back in New York, Jack couldn't get the events of the weekend in the Hamptons out of his head. The whispered voices in the library, Emily's second cell phone, Alexander's rehearsed reactions, every detail fit into a puzzle that he still couldn't fully decipher. On a particularly busy morning at the cafe, he received an unexpected visit. Marina, a former client who worked as an investigative journalist, showed up for her usual cappuccino. "It's been a while," she smiled, adjusting her thin-rimmed glasses. "I've been seeing your name in the society columns. Emily Harrison, huh?" Who would have thought? Jack served the coffee personally, as he always did with older customers. "Yeah, life sometimes surprises us." Marina hesitated for a moment, rummaging in her bag. "You know, Jack, I've been following the Harrisons for some time. I'm preparing an article on major business families in New York and—" She lowered her voice. "I've discovered some interesting things." Jack's heart raced. "What kind of things?" "I can't go into details, but—" Marina looked around, making sure no one was nearby. "Did you know that Emily's mother had a specific clause in her will? Something about the inheritance only being accessible under certain conditions." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The word clause echoed in his mind, reminding him of the conversation he had overheard in the library. "If you want to know more," Marina continued, discreetly sliding a card across the counter, "contact me. I have some documents that might interest you." After closing time, Jack couldn't resist. He called Marina and they arranged to meet at a discreet coffee shop downtown. She arrived carrying a thick folder, her eyes shining with the typical excitement of reporters about to reveal a big story. "The Harrison family isn't exactly what it appears to be," Marina began, spreading some newspaper clippings on the table. "The fortune comes mainly from Emily's mother, Caroline Harrison. She was the real businesswoman in the family." Jack examined the clippings. In one of them, an old photo showed Caroline, an elegant woman with the same green eyes as Emily, inaugurating one of the first hotels in the chain. "Caroline mysteriously stepped away from the business 5 years ago," Marina continued. "The official version is that she decided to retire to a wellness clinic in Switzerland. But—" She paused dramatically. "No one has ever seen her in public again." Jack felt a knot in his stomach. "And what does this have to do with the clause you mentioned?" Marina opened an official-looking document. Caroline's will had a specific condition. The fortune would only be transferred to Emily when she got married. But that's not all. The marriage had to be to someone without connections to the business world. Someone— She looked meaningfully at Jack. "Ordinary." The pieces began to fall into place in Jack's mind. Emily's sudden interest in his cafe, the rush to get married, the whispered conversations with Alexander. "There's more," Marina continued, her voice now almost a whisper. "I found records of large financial movements in the Harrison companies. They're practically bankrupt, Jack. The hotels have been operating in the red for months, without the money from the will." Jack interrupted the journalist. "How did you get this information?" "I have my sources," she smiled enigmatically. "In fact, one of them told me about a secret meeting in Washington last week. Apparently, Alexander is trying to negotiate an emergency loan with some state banks." Washington. The word hit Jack like a punch. Emily's mysterious call during breakfast in the Hamptons, her nervous reaction. Back in his apartment, Jack spent the night wide awake, mentally reviewing every moment of the past few months. How had he been so blind? The signs were all there. The calculated approach, the sudden interest in his small cafe, the rush to get married. His cell phone vibrated, a message from Emily. "I miss you. How about dinner tomorrow? I have news about the wedding." Jack stared at the screen for long minutes. Emily's profile picture showed her perfect smile, that same smile that had enchanted him from the first day. But now he saw beyond the polished surface, beyond the carefully constructed mask. He decided he needed more evidence. The next day, using the key Emily had given him, he entered the Harrison Hotel under the pretext of preparing a surprise for her. In the penthouse, he found Alexander's private office. The door was unlocked. Carelessness or perhaps overconfidence. Among the papers on the desk, he found a document that made his blood run cold. It was a purchase and sale contract, prepared to transfer his cafe to the Harrison chain for a paltry sum. The date was blank, waiting only for his signature. A signature that, as Emily's husband, he would be practically obliged to give. The sound of heels in the corridor made him freeze. Quickly, he took photos of the documents with his cell phone and left the office. Emily passed by him in the corridor, distracted by a phone call. "Yes, Dad," she was saying, not noticing his presence. "Everything is going according to plan. In 2 weeks, he'll officially be a Harrison, and then—" Jack hid behind a column, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily's voice faded down the corridor, but her words kept echoing in his mind. 2 weeks. The deadline for his own deception was set. That night, sitting in his empty cafe after closing, Jack looked around. The worn but welcoming walls, the wooden tables marked by time, the counter where his father had served coffee for decades, all of this would be taken from him if he didn't act quickly. His cell phone vibrated again. Emily had sent a photo. She was trying on a wedding dress in an exclusive atelier. "Can't wait to be your wife," the message said. Jack put the phone in his pocket, his mind working furiously. He wouldn't just be another piece in the Harrisons' game. It was time to turn the tables. Jack knew he needed to act with extreme caution. The Harrisons were not amateurs. They had built their empire through decades of manipulation and power games. If he wanted to have any chance against them, he would need to be smarter. The first part of his plan began with a seemingly innocent visit to the most prestigious law firm in New York. Mr. Richard Mendez, a lawyer specializing in business law, received him in an office with a panoramic view of the city. "So you're the famous fiancé of Emily Harrison," the lawyer commented, adjusting his tortoiseshell glasses. "How can I help you?" "I need guidance on some contractual issues," Jack replied, maintaining a casual tone. "Emily and her father proposed a business partnership, and I want to make sure I'm protecting my interests." Mr. Mendez smiled slyly. "Wise of you. The Harrisons are known for being as meticulous in their contracts." For the next 2 hours, Jack carefully explained his situation, showing the photos of the documents he had found in Alexander's office. The lawyer listened attentively, occasionally making notes on his tablet. "Interesting," Mr. Mendez murmured after analyzing everything. "Very interesting. You know, there's a peculiarity in American business law that might be useful in your case." Jack leaned forward, interested. The lawyer continued. "In cases of merger or acquisition, if there's evidence of coercion or bad faith, the contract can be not only annulled, but reversed in favor of the injured party." A plan began to form in Jack's mind. And what would be necessary to prove this bad faith? Documentation mainly, records of communications, reliable witnesses. Mr. Mendez made a significant pause. And of course, proof that the other party acted consciously to deceive. Leaving the lawyer's office, Jack had a clear script in mind. His first stop was an electronics store, where he bought a tiny digital recorder and deleted data recovery software. Back at the cafe, he found Emily waiting for him with her usual radiant smile. "Where have you been, love? I tried calling you several times." "Sorry, I was sorting out some details at the cafe," he replied, kissing her softly. "You know how perfectionist I am about the business." Emily smiled, but Jack noticed a flash of concern in her eyes. "Speaking of which, Dad wants to discuss the merger details tomorrow. He's prepared all the documents." "Of course," Jack replied, discreetly activating the recorder in his pocket. I can't wait to officially become part of the Harrison family. Indeed, the days that followed, Jack meticulously executed his plan. During a dinner in the Harrisons' penthouse, he accidentally spilled wine on his shirt and asked to use the bathroom in Emily's suite. In a few minutes, he had connected his phone to her computer and started the data recovery program. The information began to emerge: deleted emails between Emily and Alexander discussing the plan, WhatsApp conversations about the need to rush, the wedding before the financial problems came to light, and even a folder with photos of other men who had been considered as potential targets before him. But the most significant discovery came through Marina, the journalist. She had managed to track Caroline Harrison to a clinic in Zurich, Switzerland. The retirement of the family matriarch was, in fact, a forced exile after she discovered her ex-husband's financial manipulations. "I managed to make contact with a nurse at the clinic," Marina revealed during another secret meeting. "Caroline is lucid and furious. She never wanted to step away from the business. She was pushed out when she started questioning some suspicious transactions." Jack absorbed the information with a mix of shock and determination. The Harrison empire was a house of cards about to collapse, and Emily and Alexander were desperate to keep it standing through the will money. At home, he went over all the recordings he had made in recent weeks. Emily coldly discussing with her father how to manipulate him. Alexander instructing lawyers on how to structure contracts that would leave him completely vulnerable after the wedding. Conversations about how they would use his cafe as a front to clean part of the family's money. His cell phone rang. It was Emily again. "Love, we need to finalize the wedding details. The caterer wants to confirm the menu and—" "Sure, honey," he replied, his voice calm and controlled. "Why don't we meet tomorrow at the cafe? I have a surprise for you." After hanging up, Jack opened his laptop and began organizing all the evidence he had collected. Photos, recordings, emails, documents, all carefully catalogued and sent to different secure servers, as advised by Mr. Mendez. On his desk, the wedding invitation not yet sent for printing shone with its golden letters: Emily Harrison and Jack Oliver. "Cordially invite you." Next to it, a photo of them in the Hamptons, smiling at the camera like the perfect couple everyone believed they were. Jack picked up the photo and observed Emily's face carefully. Even now, knowing the whole truth, he could still feel his heart tighten looking at her. The love he had felt, that he still felt, had been real, at least on his part. But now that love was mixed with something else: determination. "Game over, Emily," he murmured to the photograph. "Time to show who's really in control." The week leading up to the wedding transformed New York into a whirlwind of social events. The union between the Harrison heiress and the charming coffee shop owner had captured the imagination of New York's high society, fueling society columns and salon conversations. Jack observed it all with a calculated detachment, like an actor, aware that he was participating in an elaborate play. Each smile, each gesture of affection in public was meticulously thought out. The passionate and naive fiancé that everyone saw hid a man who hadn't slept for weeks, planning every detail of his counterattack. On the morning of the wedding rehearsal, Emily appeared at the cafe earlier than usual. She was stunning in a white Chanel suit, but Jack noticed discreet dark circles under her impeccable makeup. "We need to talk about some details of the contract," she said, her voice trying to maintain a casual tone. "Dad made some last-minute changes." Jack served her a cup of coffee, observing how she nervously fiddled with the ring, that same ring that had awakened his first suspicions. "Oh, of course, love. Actually, I have some suggestions to discuss too." Alexander Harrison's office was even more imposing that afternoon. Through the windows of the top floor of the Harrison Hotel, the city stretched out like a carpet of concrete and glass. Jack discreetly adjusted the recorder in his pocket as he sat in front of the majestic desk. "Jack, my son," Alexander smiled, pushing a leather folder towards him. "Just a few formalities before the big day. Emily told me you also have some suggestions." "Yes," Jack replied calmly, taking out his own folder from his briefcase. "Actually, I'd like to propose some significant changes." Alexander's smile faltered for a moment. Emily, sitting next to her father, slightly furrowed her brow. "Changes?" she asked, her voice rising an octave. But everything's already settled, love. Jack opened his folder with deliberate slowness. Before we discuss the changes, I'd like to understand some points better. He pulled out a set of documents. For example, this transfer of ownership of the cafe, and these documents about the financial restructuring of the hotels. Alexander's face subtly paled. Where did you... I was also curious about this, Jack continued, placing photos of the recovered conversations from Emily's computer on the table, especially about the part that mentions how I was carefully selected for the role of husband. Emily abruptly stood up, knocking over her chair. Jack, you don't understand. No, Emily, I understand perfectly. He kept his voice calm, controlled. I understand about the clause in your mother's will, about the hidden debts, about how you needed someone without connections, someone manipulable. Alexander recovered first, his face assuming a mask of authority. This is ridiculous. You're delusional. Am I? Jack smiled, connecting his cell phone to the room's sound system. Emily's voice filled the environment. Everything is going according to plan, Dad. In 2 weeks, he'll officially be a Harrison, and then we can take full control. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander Harrison, the powerful patriarch, seemed to have aged 10 years in seconds. Emily remained motionless, her wide green eyes fixed on Jack. You were very clever, Jack continued, his voice now carrying a hint of sadness. But you made a crucial mistake. You underestimated the son of a man who built an honest business with his own hands. You thought I would be easily manipulated by money and status. What do you want? Alexander finally asked, his voice hoarse. Jack pulled out one last document from his folder. A new deal, on my terms. And if we refuse? Emily challenged, regaining part of her composure. Then the press will receive a very interesting package. I'm sure Marina, you remember her, don't you, Emily, would love to publish an article about how the prestigious Harrison family tried to use a marriage to cover up their debts and manipulate Caroline's will. The mention of his ex-wife's name made Alexander visibly squirm in his chair. You wouldn't do that. Wouldn't I, Jackie? Leaned forward. I have copies of all the documents on several secure servers. If anything happens to me, if you try any retaliation, everything comes to light automatically. Emily approached him, her eyes shining with a mixture of anger and... Was it admiration? You planned all this? I learned from the best, he replied, holding her gaze. Now, about the new terms. First, Caroline Harrison returns to control of the companies. Yes, I know where she is, and she's more than willing to resume her position. Alexander let out a defeated sigh. Emily continued to stare at Jack, a complex expression on her face. Second, my cafe remains independent, but will establish a real and transparent partnership with the hotels, on my terms. And the wedding, Emily asked, her voice almost a whisper. Jack looked at her for a long time. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember all the moments they had shared, the taste of her kisses, the way his heart raced when she entered the cafe. That depends on you, Emily. The question is, was any part of what we lived real for you? The silence that followed was the answer he needed. Jack stood up, adjusting the suit he had bought especially for this meeting. You have until tomorrow to accept the terms. After that, there will be no more negotiation. As he walked to the door, he heard Emily's voice, now stripped of all her usual confidence. How did you do it? How did you find out everything? Jack stopped at the threshold, turning one last time. You taught me well, you just forgot to check if I'd be a good student. Night fell over New York like a heavy cloak of expectations. Jack was in his cafe, already closed to the public, automatically, organizing the cups, while his mind went over the day's events. The confrontation with the Harrisons had been just the beginning. Now he had to deal with the consequences. The bell on the door chimed softly. Jack didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The jasmine perfume already betrayed Emily's presence. Do you still remember our first meeting here? She asked, her voice carrying a vulnerability he had never heard before. Every detail, Jack replied, finally turning to face her. Emily was different, without makeup, wearing jeans, and a simple blouse. She looked younger, more real. "Do you want to know the truth?" she asked, sitting on one of the counter stools. "The whole truth?" Jack nodded, serving 2 cups of the special coffee he had been preparing before she arrived. Emily held the cup between her hands as if seeking comfort in its warmth. "It all started 5 years ago," she began. "Mum was investigating some inconsistencies in the hotel accounts. She discovered that Dad had made risky investments, lost fortunes on bad bets. When she threatened to expose everything, he convinced her to go to Switzerland. To rest, he said. But in reality, it was a forced exile," Jack completed softly. Emily nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I knew it was wrong, but Dad always had this power over me. He said it was to protect the family legacy, that Mom was becoming paranoid. And I believed it, or maybe I wanted to believe it. And me, how did I enter this story?" A sad smile passed over her lips. "At first you were just a convenient target, someone without powerful connections, honest, hard-working, perfect to meet the will's requirements without questioning much." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "But then something happened." "What?" "You happened, Jack. Your kindness, your integrity. For the first time in years, I found myself wishing things were different, that our meeting had been real." Jack absorbed her words in silence. The cafe was quiet, only the distant hum of the refrigerator filling the environment. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you try to change things?" Emily laughed bitterly. "Fear, cowardice, years of conditioning to always follow Dad's plans." She sighed deeply. "But you did something that no one has ever done. You beat us at our own game." At that moment, Emily's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Alexander. "It's done. The lawyers are preparing the documents as requested." "Dad accepted your terms," she said, showing the message to Jack. "I think for the first time in his life, he's found someone he can't manipulate or buy." Jack walked around the counter, stopping beside her. "And you? What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to get Mom from Switzerland," she replied with determination. "It's time to fix some mistakes, and then—" She hesitated, looking at him. "Then if you allow, I'd like to try again. No lies, no manipulations, just Emily and Jack." "It's not that simple," Jack replied, feeling his heart tighten. "Trust, once broken—" "I know," she interrupted him. "I'm not asking to go back to what we were. I'm asking for a chance to show who I really am, the person you made me want to be." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of all the lies told and truths hidden. Jack observed Emily, not the Harrison heiress, not the facade fiancée, but the woman who was finally letting her masks fall. "You know what's ironic?" he finally asked. "All this elaborate plan of yours, and in the end it would have been easier to simply be honest from the beginning." Emily wiped away a solitary tear. "It's funny how we always think the most complicated path is the best. Dad taught us that trust was synonymous with weakness, that vulnerability was a flaw to be exploited. You proved us wrong." Her cell phone vibrated again. Another message from Alexander. "Caroline is on her way to New York. She wants to talk to all of us." Jack felt the weight of that moment. The next few hours would change the fate of everyone involved. The Harrison empire would be restructured, truths would come to light, and relationships would be redefined. "What happens now?" Emily asked, her voice small and uncertain. Jack looked out the cafe window, where the city lights were beginning to shine more intensely in the deepening night. Now we start over, with honesty this time." Emily stood up, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Can I come back tomorrow? For coffee?" "The cafe opens at 7, he replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "As a customer, you're always welcome." She walked to the door, pausing for a moment with her hand on the doorknob. "Jack, thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that there's strength in integrity, and that sometimes losing is the only way to really win." After she left, Jack remained in the cafe for a long time, the aroma of coffee mixing with the lingering jasmine perfume in the air. Tomorrow Caroline Harrison would return to New York. Tomorrow the new contracts would be signed. Tomorrow a new story would begin. But tonight, on that silent night in his cafe, Jack allowed himself to feel the weight and lightness of his victory, not just over the Harrisons, but over the cynicism that had almost consumed him. In the end, he had proved that integrity and intelligence could win even the most elaborate power games. John F. Kennedy International Airport buzzed with its usual bustle when the flight from Zurich landed. Jack observed from afar as Emily anxiously waited near the arrival gate. Alexander Harrison was not present. By his own choice or on the advice of lawyers, no one knew for sure. Caroline Harrison emerged from the arrival area with the same elegance that had made her legendary in New York's business circles. 5 years of forced exile had not diminished her majestic presence. Her green eyes, so similar to Emily's, swept the hall until they found her daughter. The embrace between mother and daughter was long and silent, laden with years of absence and unspoken words. Jack maintained his distance, respecting that intimate moment of reconciliation. "So you're Jack," Caroline finally said, turning to him. Her voice had an authoritative timbre softened by a touch of humor. "The man who dismantled my ex-husband's little empire of lies." "Mrs. Harrison," Jack greeted her respectfully. "Welcome back." "Mom," Emily intervened, "Jack isn't just—" "I know exactly who he is, dear," Caroline gently interrupted her. "I read all the reports your lawyers sent me. I must say I'm impressed. Not just anyone manages to outsmart Alexander at his own game." The journey from the airport to the Harrison Hotel was made in an executive limousine. Caroline observed the city through the window with eager eyes, as if trying to absorb every change that had occurred during her absence. "The city has changed," she commented. "But some things remain the same. Power still corrupts and money still blinds." "Mom," Emily began, but Caroline raised her hand, silencing her. "I'm not here to make accusations, daughter. I'm here to fix mistakes, including my own. I allowed your father to control everything for too long, let him turn our family into a field of manipulation." The limousine stopped in front of the Harrison Hotel. Photographers were already waiting. Somehow the news of Caroline's return had leaked. Emily instinctively moved closer to her mother, protective. "Let them photograph," Caroline smiled. "It's time for New York to know that the Harrisons have a new story to tell." In the hotel lobby, employees paused their activities to observe Caroline's passage. Many still remembered her, the true force behind the hotel's success, the visionary who had transformed a small inn into a hotel empire. Alexander was waiting in the penthouse office, visibly nervous. Seeing his ex-wife, he visibly paled. "Caroline," he murmured, "you're—" "Spare us the false courtesies, Alexander," she interrupted him, sitting at the desk that had once been hers. "I'm here for a business meeting, not a family reconciliation." For the next 3 hours, lawyers presented documents, contracts were reviewed, and a new administrative structure was established. Caroline would resume operational control of the hotels, with Emily as executive vice president. Alexander would maintain a position on the board, but without decision-making power. "And what about the cafe?" Alexander asked, looking at Jack. "The cafe remains independent," Caroline answered before Jack could speak. "But we'll establish a genuine partnership, this time based on mutual respect, not manipulation." When the meeting ended, Caroline asked to speak with Jack privately. Emily hesitated at the door, but a look from her mother was enough to make her withdraw. "You know, Jack," Caroline began, pouring herself a glass of water, "when I learned that my daughter was engaged to a coffee shop owner, I imagined it was another of Alexander's schemes. He was always good at finding people to manipulate." Jack remained silent, waiting. "But you surprised me. Not only did you resist the manipulation, but you turned the game in your favor, and most impressively, you did it without losing your integrity. You seem to approve of my actions, Jack." They observed. Caroline smiled, the same enigmatic smile he had so often seen on Emily. "I approve of your intelligence and moral strength, but mainly, I approve of the effect you had on my daughter." "How so?" "Emily is different. For the first time in her life, she's questioning the values her father taught her. She's discovering her own voice. Caroline stood up, approaching the window. So you know what my biggest mistake was? Allowing Alexander to shape her character while I built our empire. Now I see that some prices are too high. Jack absorbed her words, thinking about how Emily had changed in recent weeks. And now? He asked, what happens to all of us? Caroline turned to face him. Now, Jack, each of us has a choice to make. Alexander will have to learn to live without the control he so cherishes. I need to regain my daughter's trust. And Emily, she made a significant pause. Emily needs to discover who she is without her father's influence. And what about me? You, Caroline smiled. You've already made your choice when you decided to confront our family with honesty and courage. The question now is, are you willing to give a second chance not just to the Harrisons, but especially to my daughter? Before Jack could answer, soft knocks on the door announced Emily's return. She entered timidly like an uncertain teenager. Is everything okay here? Perfectly fine, dear, Caroline replied, walking towards the door. Just getting to know better the man who brought truth back to our family. When the door closed behind Caroline, Emily and Jack found themselves alone, the silence heavy with all the possibilities of the future. 6 months passed since Caroline Harrison's return. New York was experiencing its mildest autumn in years, and Vintage Cafe was busier than ever. Jack observed the morning movement with satisfaction, noting how his clientele had diversified. Executives in suits and ties now shared space with the usual regulars. The partnership with the Harrison hotels had proven to be an unexpected success, not in the way Alexander had originally planned, but through genuine collaboration. The cafe supplied its special products to the hotel chain, maintaining full autonomy in its operation. Your espresso is still the best in the city, a familiar voice commented. Jack turned to find Caroline Harrison occupying her usual place at the counter. In recent months, she had transformed the cafe into her informal office, preferring the cozy atmosphere to the hotel's corporate rooms. You're biased, ma'am, he smiled, serving her a cup of his special blend. I've never been biased about anything, young man, she replied with an amused gleam in her eyes. That's why I'm going back to Switzerland next week. Jack raised his eyebrows, surprised. But the hotel restructuring is practically complete, Caroline finished. Emily is more than prepared to take over the presidency, and Alexander, she paused, taking a sip of coffee. Well, let's say that a stint managing our small inn in the Alps will do him good. Jack absorbed the information while organizing some cups. Over the past few months, he had witnessed a remarkable transformation in Emily. Under her mother's mentorship, she had flourished as an executive, implementing changes that brought new life to the hotel chain. And what about us? Emily's voice surprised him. She was standing at the entrance of the cafe, elegant in an executive suit but with a softness in her gaze that hadn't existed before. I'll leave you two to talk, Caroline smiled, standing up. Jack, dear, thank you for teaching me that sometimes we need to lose something to discover its true value. After Caroline left, Emily took her place at the counter. She was always good at dramatic exits, she commented with a half-smile. How are you? Jack asked, noticing the small changes in her, the more relaxed way of speaking, the absence of the old family ring, the way her eyes now met his without hesitation. Good. Different. She paused, playing with the empty cup in front of her. Free, I guess. For the first time in my life, I'm making my own decisions. Jack started preparing a new coffee, his movements precise and familiar. And what decisions are those? I sold my apartment on Fifth Avenue, she replied. Bought a smaller one in Brooklyn, closer to here, she added with a meaningful look. Emily, no, she gently interrupted him. Let me finish. In these past few months, I've learned more about myself than in my entire life. I discovered that I don't need to be who my father wanted me to be, that I can be strong without being manipulative, successful without stepping on others. Jack placed the cup of fresh coffee in front of her. Emily took it, her fingers lightly brushing against his. You know what else I discovered? She continued. That Emily who first walked in here planning to use you in a scheme, she doesn't exist anymore. But the Emily who fell in love with you, who admires your integrity, who wants to build something true, she's real, she always was. Jack felt his heart race. For months they had maintained a cordial, professional relationship, but there was always something more, unspoken, floating between them. How can I be sure? He asked, his voice hoarse, with emotion. Emily smiled, reaching for her bag. From it, she pulled out a yellowed envelope. Open it. Inside the envelope, Jack found the deed to Vintage Cafe, the original one, which his father had signed decades ago. Where did you get this? In Dad's archives, she replied. He had secretly bought the property years ago, planning to use it as leverage if you resisted the plan. Emily paused, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I transferred the property back to you. No conditions, no hidden contracts, just the truth. Jack looked at the document in his hands, his cafe, his legacy, back where it belonged. When he raised his eyes, he saw that Emily had come around the counter and was standing beside him. I'm not asking for anything in return, she said softly. I just wanted to prove that I've changed, that I've learned from you that true love isn't about power or control, it's about freedom and trust. Jack placed the document on the counter and for the first time in months allowed himself to really look at Emily, not the Harrison heiress, not the fiancée who had deceived him, but the woman who had found her own truth through her choices. Would you like a coffee? He finally asked, a soft smile on his lips. Emily laughed, tears of relief and happiness running down her face. I thought you'd never ask. Outside the cafe, Caroline Harrison observed the scene through the window, a satisfied smile on her face. Her cell phone vibrated, a message from Alexander in Switzerland. You were right, you always were. Though of course I was, she murmured to herself, watching as Jack and Emily now chatted animatedly about something, their faces close, genuine smiles on their lips. Sometimes, true love isn't about finding the perfect person, but about two people choosing to be better for each other. And so on an autumn morning in New York, in the same cafe where it had all begun, a new story was starting to be written. Not a story of power and manipulation, but of redemption and true love. Because in the end, it's our choices, not our past, that define who we really are. Dear listeners, we hope that Jack and Emily's story has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions and discoveries, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Tell us in the comments, do you believe in second chances when love is true? Which city are you following us from? Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexities of love and human relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content. We await you in the comments.